Life has a funny way of lulling you into a false sense of security. You go about your days, thinking you've got it all figured out. You've got the wife, the kids, the house, the whole package. That was me, up until a few weeks ago. My name's Jake, and I've been married to Linda for nearly 15 years. Together, we've got two great kids, Sarah, who's 13, and Lizzie, who just turned 11. I work in logistics, nothing glamorous, but it pays the bills and keeps us comfortable. Linda used to work at a nursery, but she decided to stay home after we got married to focus on the kids and the house. Or at least, that's what I thought. Our life was good, or so I believed. We had a routine, one that had been the same for years. I'd get up early, get ready for work, kiss Linda goodbye, and head out to the office. She'd take care of the kids, make sure they were ready for school, and then spend the rest of the day doing whatever needed to be done around the house. In the evenings, we'd have dinner as a family, help the girls with their homework, and maybe watch a little TV before bed. It was a simple life, but it was ours, and I was content. Looking back now, there were signs that things weren't as perfect as I thought. Little things that didn't add up, but I ignored them because I trusted Linda. We had been through a lot together, and I never imagined she would betray me. But, as they say, hindsight is 20/20ths. It started with the texts. Linda's phone would light up at odd times, sometimes late at night when we were in bed. I didn't think much of it at first, she's always been sociable, had a lot of friends. But then I noticed that she would quickly put her phone away whenever I was around, as if she didn't want me to see what was on the screen. I asked her about it once, and she brushed it off, saying it was just a friend from high school she reconnected with on Facebook. I didn't push the issue. I mean, why would I? I trusted her. Then there was the gym. Linda started going more often, which in itself wasn't strange, she'd always been into fitness. But she started going at odd hours, sometimes twice a day, and she seemed to care a lot more about her appearance. New clothes, new makeup, the whole deal. Again, I didn't think much of it. I figured she just wanted to look good, and who was I to complain about that? I was happy she was taking care of herself. In fact, I even encouraged it. But the sex. That's where things started to really feel off. Our sex life, which had always been pretty active, suddenly dropped off a cliff. At first, I thought maybe she was just tired, or stressed out with the kids. But it went on for weeks. I tried to initiate a few times, but she always had an excuse. Too tired, not in the mood, a headache, you name it, she used it. It was frustrating, but I didn't want to pressure her, so I let it go. But the doubt started creeping in, a small voice in the back of my mind that wouldn't shut up. The final straw came one night when we were watching TV in the living room. Linda's phone buzzed, and I saw her glance at it before quickly turning the screen away from me. I didn't say anything, but I couldn't help feeling that something was seriously wrong. That night, after she fell asleep, I did something I never thought I'd do, I checked her phone. I know, it was an invasion of privacy, but I had to know. What I found changed everything. Messages from a guy named Chris, someone I vaguely remembered as a friend from her high school days. The messages weren't just friendly, though. They were explicit, the kind of things you'd only say to someone you were sleeping with. My heart sank as I scrolled through the messages, each one a knife in my chest. The dates on the texts went back months, meaning this wasn't some one-time mistake. It was an ongoing affair, right under my nose. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? My mind was racing with 1,000 thoughts: anger, betrayal, confusion. I kept looking at Linda, lying there peacefully asleep, as if she hadn't just ripped my world apart. I wanted to wake her up and demand answers, but I knew that wouldn't solve anything. I needed to think, to figure out what to do next. The next day, I pretended everything was normal. I went to work, went through the motions, but inside, I was dying. I kept replaying the texts in my head, the things they said to each other, the lies she told me. Every time I thought about it, I felt sick to my stomach. But I had to keep it together, for the kids if nothing else. When I got home that evening, Linda was her usual self, smiling and asking how my day was. I felt like I was living in some kind of twisted dream. How could she act so normal, like everything was fine? How long had she been doing this? How many lies had she told me? I could barely look at her without feeling a mix of rage and sadness. I knew I couldn't keep pretending. I had to confront her, but I didn't know how. The thought of what she might say terrified me. Would she deny it? Would she blame me? I had no idea how she would react, and that scared me more than anything. That's when I realized that my life, the life I thought I had, was over. Everything was about to change, and there was no going back. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I loved and trusted, was gone. In her place was someone I didn't recognize, someone who could lie to my face and betray me without a second thought. I spent the next few days trying to figure out what to do. I thought about just walking away, leaving her and starting over. But then I thought about the kids. What would happen to them? How would they handle it? They didn't deserve any of this. I couldn't just walk away, not without a fight. So, I decided to confront her, to get the truth out in the open and see where the chips fell. I had no idea what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure: my life would never be the same again. The days leading up to the confrontation felt like the slow burn before a storm. Every moment I spent near Linda was like living on the edge of a knife. I was caught between wanting to scream at her and wanting to cry. It was unbearable, and I knew I couldn't keep it bottled up any longer. I had to do something. That evening, Linda announced she was going out with some friends for a girls' night. My stomach churned as I nodded, forcing a smile. "Sounds fun," I said, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. She kissed me on the cheek, her touch sending a shiver of disgust down my spine, and left the house. As soon as the door closed behind her, I sprang into action. I had already prepared for this moment. Earlier that day, I installed a GPS tracker on her car, something I never thought I'd do but felt justified under the circumstances. I watched the tracker's signal on my phone as it moved across town, eventually stopping at a location that wasn't anywhere near a bar or a restaurant. It was a residential area, one I didn't recognize. My heart pounded in my chest as I grabbed my keys and headed out. I had a pretty good idea of what I was going to find, but part of me still hoped I was wrong. Maybe this was just paranoia. Maybe there was an innocent explanation for all of it. But deep down, I knew the truth. I could feel it in my gut. I drove across town, following the signal until I reached the address. It was a small, nondescript house in a quiet neighborhood. The kind of place where people probably thought nothing ever happened. I parked down the street and sat there for a moment, staring at the house. My hands were shaking, my mind racing with all the possible scenarios that could unfold in the next few minutes. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I got out of the car and walked up to the house. Every step felt like I was walking into a nightmare, but I couldn't stop. I had to know. I had to see it with my own eyes. I reached the front door and paused, my fist hovering just inches from the wood. My mind screamed at me to turn around, to leave before I did something I couldn't take back. But I pushed that voice aside and knocked. It took a few moments, but then the door opened. A man stood there, tall, muscular, older than me by maybe 10 years but still in good shape. He had a smug look on his face, the kind of look that made me want to punch him right then and there. I didn't need an introduction, I knew exactly who he was. This was Chris, the guy from the texts. The guy who had been fucking my wife. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "Yeah," I replied, my voice low and cold. "Is Linda here?" His smirk widened. "Who's asking?" That was it. I shoved past him, ignoring his protests, and stormed into the house. "Linda!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the small living room. I could hear footsteps coming from the hallway, and then she appeared, her face going pale the moment she saw me. "Jake, what are you doing here?" she stammered, her eyes wide with panic. "I think you know exactly why I'm here," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "How long, Linda? How long have you been lying to me? How long have you been fucking this guy behind my back?" She looked between me and Chris, who was now standing behind me, a smug grin still plastered on his face. "Jake, I can explain," she started, but I wasn't having it. "Explain?" Explain what, Linda? That you've been cheating on me? That you've been screwing this asshole while I've been at home taking care of our kids? My voice was rising with every word, the rage bubbling up inside me like a volcano about to erupt. Chris chuckled behind me, and that was the final straw. I spun around and punched him square in the jaw. He stumbled back, caught off guard, but quickly recovered, his face twisting into a snarl. You think you can just walk into my house and hit me, he growled, lunging at me. We collided, crashing into the coffee table, shattering it into pieces. I was fueled by pure adrenaline, every punch I landed a release of all the pain and anger that had been building up inside me for weeks. Chris fought back, but I was relentless, not caring about the consequences. All I could think about was making him pay for what he had done. Linda screamed, trying to pull us apart, but it was no use. We were locked in a brutal fight, fists flying, blood spilling. I felt his fist connect with my ribs, sending a sharp pain shooting through my side, but I didn't care. I was running on pure instinct, fueled by rage and betrayal. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I managed to pin Chris to the ground. I had him by the throat, my knuckles white as I squeezed, my breath coming in ragged gasps. His face was turning purple, his eyes bulging as he struggled to breathe. Jake, stop! Linda screamed, pulling at my arms. You're going to kill him! Her voice snapped me out of my blind rage, and I released Chris, letting him slump to the floor, gasping for air. I stood up, my chest heaving, and looked down at him, feeling a twisted sense of satisfaction at the sight of his bloodied face. Get the fuck out of here, I spat, my voice low and dangerous. If I ever see you near my wife again, I swear to God, I'll kill you. Chris didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled to his feet, clutching his throat, and stumbled out of the house, not even bothering to grab his things. Linda was crying, her hands trembling as she looked at me, a mix of fear and guilt in her eyes. Jake! I'm so sorry, she sobbed, reaching out to me. But I stepped back, disgusted by the sight of her. How could she stand there and pretend to be sorry? How could she look at me with those tearful eyes and expect me to forgive her after what she had done? Sorry? I repeated, my voice cold and distant. You think sorry is going to fix this? You think saying those words is going to undo what you did? She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No, I don't know what I was thinking. Thinking? I snapped, my anger flaring up again. You weren't thinking, Linda. You were fucking another man while I was at home, taking care of our kids, thinking we had a life together. You were lying to me, every single day, every time you kissed me, every time you looked me in the eye. How could you do that? How could you destroy everything we had? She broke down completely, sinking to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. But I couldn't find it in me to comfort her. All I felt was anger and a deep, crushing sense of betrayal. The woman I had loved, the woman I had built my life with, was nothing more than a stranger to me now. Get up, I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. We're going home. She nodded, wiping her tears, and slowly got to her feet. I didn't wait for her as I walked out of the house, the night air hitting me like a cold slap to the face. I could hear her footsteps behind me as we made our way to the car, but I didn't look at her. I couldn't. The drive home was silent. Linda sat beside me, still sniffling, but I kept my eyes on the road, my mind numb. I didn't know what to think, what to feel. Everything I thought I knew about my life had been turned upside down, and I was struggling to process it all. When we finally pulled into the driveway, I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, staring at the house. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a place full of lies and broken promises. Jake, please, can we talk? Linda's voice was small, trembling. I didn't answer her. I just got out of the car and walked into the house. I could hear her following me, but I didn't care. I went straight to the bedroom, not even bothering to turn on the lights, and sat on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands. Linda stood in the doorway, her silhouette barely visible in the darkness. Jake! I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. I looked up at her, my eyes hard. Sorry isn't enough, Linda. Not this time. She opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off. I don't want to hear it. Just leave me alone. She hesitated, then slowly backed out of the room, closing the door behind her. I sat there in the dark, the weight of everything that had happened crashing down on me. My marriage was over. My life as I knew it was over. And I had no idea what to do next. The house was eerily silent after Linda left me alone in the bedroom. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on me, suffocating, inescapable. The fight with Chris, the exposure of Linda's betrayal, it all played out in my mind like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I knew this wasn't over. The confrontation we had at Chris's place was just the beginning. Now, I needed to face the woman I had once loved more than anything in the world and demand the answers I both dreaded and needed to hear. I sat there on the edge of the bed, staring into the darkness. Part of me wanted to crawl under the covers and block out everything that had happened, to pretend that I hadn't just found out my wife had been cheating on me. But I couldn't do that. This was my life now, and I had to face it head-on, no matter how much it hurt. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I forced myself to stand up and head out of the bedroom. I found Linda sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale and tear-streaked, her hands shaking as she clutched a mug of untouched coffee. She looked up when she saw me, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Jake," she started, her voice trembling, "please, can we talk?" I leaned against the doorway, crossing my arms over my chest, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Talk," I said flatly. "Explain to me how the woman I've spent almost half my life with could do this to me. How you could lie to me every day for months, maybe years, and still look me in the eye like nothing was wrong." She flinched at the coldness in my voice, but she didn't look away. I don't know how to explain it," she whispered. "I know it sounds like an excuse, but I didn't mean for it to happen." "Didn't mean for it to happen?" I repeated, incredulous. "Linda, you didn't just trip and fall into this guy's bed. You made a choice. You chose to betray me, to betray our family, and for what? What did you get out of it?" Her eyes filled with tears again, and she shook her head. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice cracking. It started as something innocent. He was an old friend from school, and we reconnected on Facebook. We started chatting, catching up, and then it just turned into an affair. I finished for her, my voice hard. "You started fucking him behind my back. Don't sugarcoat it, Linda. Be honest for once in your life." She winced at my harsh words but nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Yes," she said softly. "It turned into an affair. But it wasn't about you, Jake. It wasn't because I don't love you. I do love you. I never stopped loving you." I felt a bitter laugh bubble up inside me. "You love me? You think that makes it okay? You think telling me you love me is going to erase the fact that you've been sleeping with another man?" "No," she said quickly, her voice desperate. "No, I know it doesn't make it okay. I know I fucked up. But, Jake, I was lonely. You were always so busy with work, with the kids. We drifted apart, and I needed someone to talk to." "Talk to?" I snapped. "Is that what you call it? You needed someone to talk to, so you started sending him nude photos, meeting up with him, screwing him behind my back? You could have talked to me, Linda. You could have told me how you were feeling, and we could have worked on it together. But instead, you decided to destroy our marriage." Her hands trembled as she wiped at her tears. "I know, Jake. I know I should have talked to you. But by the time I realized how deep I was in, it was too late. I didn't know how to stop it." "Too late?" I echoed, shaking my head. "It's never too late to stop, Linda. You had a choice, and you chose to keep going. You chose to keep lying to me." She was sobbing now, her shoulders shaking as she buried her face in her hands. "I'm sorry," she cried. "I'm so sorry, Jake. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted this to happen." "But it did happen," I said, my voice cold and unyielding. And now we have to deal with the consequences. Linda looked up at me, her tear-filled eyes searching my face for any sign of forgiveness. Please, Jake, she begged, her voice barely above a whisper. Please don't leave me. I'll do anything to make this right. I'll go to counseling, I'll cut off all contact with Chris, I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Just, please don't leave me. I stared at her, my heart a tangled mess of anger, betrayal, and the faintest shred of the love I used to feel for her. A part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to think that maybe we could fix this. But the other part of me, the part that had been shattered by her betrayal, knew that things would never be the same again. How long, Linda? I asked, my voice low and dangerous. How long has this been going on? She hesitated, and I could see the fear in her eyes. A few months, she admitted. It started earlier this year. And you've been lying to me the entire time, I said, my voice filled with disgust. Every time I asked you where you were, who you were with, you lied to my face. She nodded, unable to meet my gaze. Yes, she whispered. I lied. I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. I can't believe this is happening, I muttered, more to myself than to her. I thought we had something real, Linda. I thought you were my partner, my best friend, but you threw it all away for what? A fling? Some guy who made you feel special for a few months. It wasn't like that, she insisted, her voice pleading. It wasn't just a fling. I was confused, I was lost, and he filled a void that I didn't even know I had. Filled a void? I repeated, my voice rising in anger. You want to talk about a void? How about the fucking void you've left in my heart? How about the void you've created in our family? What about the kids, Linda? What happens when they find out that their mother has been screwing around with some other guy? She winced, her face crumpling in guilt. They don't need to know, she said quickly. We can work this out, Jake. We can fix this before it gets that far. You really think that's possible? I asked, my voice incredulous. You think we can just sweep this under the rug and go back to the way things were? She nodded, desperation in her eyes. Yes. I know it's not going to be easy, but we can try, Jake. We can go to counseling, we can rebuild our marriage. Rebuild? I interrupted, my voice filled with bitterness. How do you rebuild something that's been completely destroyed? How do you rebuild trust when it's been shattered into a million pieces? She didn't have an answer for that. She just sat there, tears streaming down her face, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of the table. I could see the fear in her eyes, the realization that she might have lost everything. Please, Jake, she whispered, her voice breaking. Please give me a chance to make this right. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm begging you, please don't give up on us. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that we could somehow fix this, that we could find a way to move forward. But every time I looked at her, all I could see was the betrayal. All I could see was the image of her with Chris, the texts, the lies, and it made me sick to my stomach. I need time to think, I said finally, my voice hollow. I don't know what I'm going to do, but right now, I just need to be alone. She nodded, her face crumpling in despair. Okay, she whispered. I understand. I'll give you all the time you need. I didn't say anything else. I just turned and walked out of the kitchen, my heart heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. As I made my way back to the bedroom, I could hear her crying softly behind me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, closing my eyes as the reality of the situation washed over me. My marriage was in ruins, my heart shattered into a million pieces. And I didn't know if I would ever be able to put it back together again. As I lay in bed that night, staring up at the ceiling, I tried to imagine a future where things could be different. A future where I could forgive Linda, where we could somehow rebuild what had been destroyed. But every time I tried to picture it, the image of her with Chris, the lies she had told, the betrayal she had inflicted on me, came crashing back into my mind. I wanted to scream, to cry, to lash out at the unfairness of it all. But I was too numb, too drained to do anything but lie there in the darkness, the weight of it all pressing down on me like a ton of bricks. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache, a result of the sleepless night and the emotional turmoil I had been through. My mind was still racing, trying to process everything that had happened, and more importantly, what was to come. Linda was still asleep when I got out of bed. I couldn't stand to be near her right now, so I quietly dressed and left the room, heading downstairs to clear my head. As I made my way to the kitchen, I passed by the living room, where photos of our family were proudly displayed on the wall. I stopped in front of one particular photo, our wedding day. We looked so happy, so in love. I remembered the day like it was yesterday, the way Linda smiled at me, the way she promised to love me forever. It felt like a cruel joke now, looking at that picture, knowing what she had done. I felt a surge of anger rise up inside me. This wasn't just about her betrayal anymore. It was about the lies, the deceit, the way she had pretended everything was fine while she was tearing our family apart. I couldn't just sit back and let her get away with it. She needed to understand the gravity of what she had done, and I needed to make sure everyone else knew it too. With that thought in mind, I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found her parents' number. My hand trembled as I hit the call button, but I was resolute. They needed to know the truth about their daughter, about the kind of person she had become. The phone rang a few times before Linda's mother answered. Hello, her voice was warm and familiar, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit. Hi, Carol. It's Jake, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I need to talk to you and Tom. It's about Linda. There was a pause on the other end, then a concerned, Jake, is everything okay? What's going on? Can I come over? I asked, my voice tight. I'd rather talk about it in person. Of course, she replied, worry lacing her words. Come over right away. We'll be here. I hung up the phone, feeling a strange mix of dread and determination. Telling her parents wasn't going to be easy, but it had to be done. They deserved to know what their daughter had been up to, and I wasn't going to let her hide behind her lies any longer. I grabbed my keys and left the house without saying a word to Linda, who was still asleep upstairs. The drive to her parents' house was a blur, my mind consumed with thoughts of what I was about to do. How would they react? Would they believe me? Or would they try to defend her? When I arrived, Carol and Tom were already waiting for me in the living room. They greeted me with worried expressions, and I could tell they sensed that something was terribly wrong. Jake, what's going on? Tom asked as I sat down on the couch opposite them. You're scaring us. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions raging inside me. I'm sorry to come over like this, but there's something you need to know about Linda. Their faces grew even more concerned, and Carol reached out to touch my arm. Jake, you're like a son to us. Whatever it is, we'll get through it together. Her words only made what I was about to say even harder, but I couldn't back down now. Linda's been having an affair, I said, my voice breaking slightly. I found out last night. She's been cheating on me for months. The room fell silent. Carol's hand dropped from my arm, and Tom's face hardened with shock and disbelief. What are you saying? Carol whispered, her eyes wide with horror. I wish I wasn't saying it, I replied, feeling a lump form in my throat. But it's true. She's been lying to me, to all of us. I found the texts, the photos. I confronted her, and she admitted it. Tom clenched his fists, his jaw tight. Who is it? Who's the bastard she's been seeing? Some guy named Chris, I said, bitterness creeping into my voice. She met him through Facebook. He's an old friend from high school. Apparently, they reconnected. Carol looked like she might faint. Oh my God. How could she do this? How could she betray you like that? That's what I'm trying to figure out, I said, my voice hollow. But I thought you both deserved to know the truth. I can't keep this a secret. Not after everything that's happened. Tom was seething, his face red with anger. That little. I'm going to have a word with her. This is unacceptable, Jake. She's disgraced our family. Carol was crying now, her shoulders shaking with sobs. How could she? How could she do this to you, to the children? I don't know, I said, feeling my own anger mix with sadness. But I'm not going to let her sweep this under the rug. She needs to face the consequences. Tom nodded, his eyes dark with fury. You're damn right, Jake. She's not going to get away with this. I stayed with them for a little while longer, trying to help them process the shock. It was clear that they were devastated by the news, just as I was. Linda had not only betrayed me, but she had also betrayed her own family, the people who had loved and supported her through everything. Before I left, Tom insisted that they would talk to Linda themselves. We need to hear it from her, he said, his voice trembling with controlled rage. We need to understand why she did this. Good luck with that, I muttered, feeling exhausted and drained. I'm not sure she even knows why. As I drove away from their house, I felt a small sense of satisfaction. Telling them the truth had been painful, but it was necessary. Linda couldn't hide behind her lies any longer. But there was still more to be done. I knew that her friends would also need to know the truth. Linda had a close-knit group of girlfriends, women she had known since college. They were always together, always gossiping and sharing their lives with each other. But I doubted any of them knew what Linda had been up to. She was too good at pretending, at keeping up appearances. I wasn't sure how to go about telling them. Part of me wanted to send a group message, just lay it all out there in one go. But that felt too impersonal, too cold. These were people I had known for years, people I had shared holidays and vacations with. They deserved more than a text message. I decided to call one of her closest friends, Michelle. She had always been the most level-headed of the group, the one who kept everyone else grounded. If anyone would know how to handle this, it would be her. Michelle answered on the second ring, her voice cheerful and upbeat. Jake. How are you? It's been a while. Hey, Michelle, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Yeah, it has. Listen. I need to talk to you about something. It's about Linda. The tone of her voice changed instantly. What's going on, Jake? Is everything okay? No, I admitted, feeling the weight of the truth pressing down on me again. It's not okay. Linda, she's been having an affair. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. What? Michelle finally said, her voice full of disbelief. Jake, are you serious? Dead serious, I replied, my voice flat. I found out last night. She admitted it. She's been seeing some guy behind my back for months. Oh my God, Michelle whispered, her voice trembling. I don't even know what to say. How could she do this? I don't know, I said, feeling the familiar bitterness rise up again. But I thought you should know. I'm telling you because I need to make sure everyone knows the truth. I can't let her pretend like nothing happened. Of course, Michelle said quickly. You're right, Jake. She can't just get away with this. I'll talk to the others. We'll figure out what to do. Thank you, I said, feeling a small sense of relief. I appreciate it, Michelle. Take care of yourself, Jake, she said softly. We're here for you. After I hung up, I felt a mix of emotions. I had just set in motion something that couldn't be undone. Linda's entire world was about to come crashing down, and there was no going back. But as much as it hurt, I knew it was the right thing to do. She had to face the consequences of her actions, and so did the people around her. I spent the rest of the day and a days, trying to wrap my head around everything that had happened. I knew I couldn't stay in the house much longer. The idea of being around Linda, of pretending like we could somehow fix this, was unbearable. I needed to get out, to clear my head, to figure out what my next steps were going to be. When I got home that evening, the tension in the house was palpable. Linda was in the kitchen, pacing back and forth, clearly agitated. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes red from crying. Where have you been? She demanded, her voice shaky. I went to see your parents, I replied, my voice cold. I told them everything. She stared at me, her face going pale. You told them? Yes, I said, my tone unyielding. They deserve to know the truth, Linda. I'm not going to let you hide behind your lies anymore. She sank down into a chair, burying her face in her hands. Jake, please, you didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, I snapped. You need to face the consequences of what you've done. I'm not going to protect you from this. And I called Michelle, I added, my voice flat. She's going to tell the rest of your friends. They all need to know what kind of person you really are. Linda looked up at me, her eyes filled with despair. Why are you doing this, Jake? Why are you trying to destroy me? Destroy you? I repeated, incredulous. You destroyed yourself, Linda. You destroyed our marriage, our family. I'm just making sure everyone knows the truth. She didn't have a response to that. She just sat there, broken, defeated, tears streaming down her face. And for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the lies, the betrayal, the way she had torn our family apart without a second thought. And any sympathy I might have felt evaporated. I'm leaving, I said, my voice cold and final. I can't stay here. I need time to think, to figure out what I'm going to do next. Don't bother trying to contact me. Linda looked up at me, her eyes pleading. Jake, please. But I didn't wait to hear what she had to say. I turned and walked out of the house, the door slamming shut behind me. I felt a sense of finality, of closure, as I got into my car and drove away. There was no turning back now. The life I had known was over, and it was time to start figuring out what came next. As I drove aimlessly through the streets, the events of the day replaying in my mind, I realized that in some strange way, I felt lighter. The truth was out, the lies exposed, and the burden of secrecy lifted from my shoulders. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my own life again. And that was a start. Driving away from the house that evening, I felt a strange mix of emotions. The confrontation with Linda, the calls to her parents and friends, it had all left me exhausted, yet there was a sense of grim satisfaction in knowing that the truth was out. But even as I tried to focus on what to do next, there was one person who kept creeping into my thoughts, gnawing at my mind like a persistent itch, Chris. The man who had destroyed my marriage, the one who had wormed his way into Linda's life and turned everything upside down. I couldn't just let him get away with it. He needed to face the consequences too. I didn't want to beat him up again, that wasn't the kind of revenge I was after now. The physical confrontation had been impulsive, fueled by the raw, immediate anger of discovery. But now, in the cold light of day, I wanted something that would cut deeper, something that would leave a lasting mark on him, just as he had left one on my life. I spent the next few days carefully piecing together everything I knew about Chris. It wasn't much, just bits and pieces from Linda's texts and what little I'd gleaned from that night at his house. But it was enough to get started. He was a local guy, owned a small business, and seemed to be well liked in the community. He had a reputation to protect, and that's where I planned to hit him hardest. The first step was to gather evidence. I wanted something solid, something that would expose him for who he really was. I spent hours going through Linda's phone, her emails, her social media accounts, anything I could find that would tie Chris to the affair. There were messages, of course, plenty of them, but I needed more than that. I needed something that would leave no room for doubt, something that would shatter his carefully constructed facade. I decided to take a different approach. Chris might have been careful about hiding his tracks, but I doubted he'd been able to cover everything. I began looking into his business, scouring reviews, forums, and social media for anything that could be used against him. It was tedious work, but I was driven by the need to see him brought down, to make him pay for what he'd done. It wasn't long before I struck gold. Buried deep in the reviews of his business, I found complaints from a few customers, small things, really. But there was a pattern, a trail of dissatisfied clients who had been brushed off or ignored. Some complained about shoddy work, others about hidden fees, and a few even mentioned that they felt cheated by his business practices. It wasn't enough to ruin him on its own, but it was a start. I reached out to these people, subtly at first, pretending to be another dissatisfied customer looking for advice. Most were eager to vent their frustrations, and some even provided me with more detailed accounts of their experiences. I compiled everything into a neat little dossier, documenting every complaint, every shady deal. It wasn't much, but it was enough to paint a picture of Chris as a less than honest businessman. But I didn't stop there. I wanted to hit him where it would hurt the most, his reputation. I began posting anonymous reviews online, using the information I'd gathered to craft scathing critiques of his business. I posted on local forums, business review sites, even social media groups. I made sure to highlight the negative aspects of his character that I'd uncovered, painting him as untrustworthy, dishonest, and not worth doing business with. Slowly, I began to see the effects. New reviews started popping up, echoing my sentiments, as other dissatisfied customers joined the chorus. His business's ratings began to drop, and the negative feedback started to snowball. But I wasn't done yet. I knew Chris was active on social media, particularly in the local business community. He had built a network of connections, people who respected him, who saw him as a successful entrepreneur. I decided to target that network next. Using a fake profile, I began spreading rumors. I posted in business groups, hinting that Chris's business was on the brink of collapse, that he was involved in shady deals, that his personal life was a mess. I was careful to make it look like idle gossip, the kind that spreads like wildfire in small communities. It didn't take long for the rumors to start circulating, and soon, Chris's name was being dragged through the mud by people who had once admired him. I knew I was playing a dangerous game, but I didn't care. Chris had already destroyed my life, now it was his turn to feel the heat. I watched as his social media presence began to dwindle, as people started to distance themselves from him, as his business suffered the fallout from the bad press. It was satisfying, in a dark way, to see the damage I was causing. But the final blow came when I decided to go public with what I knew. I crafted a carefully worded letter, detailing Chris's affair with my wife, complete with screenshots of their messages and photos. I made sure to include the most damning evidence, the things that would be impossible to deny. I didn't send it to everyone, just a select few of his most influential contacts, people who could spread the word, who could make sure that Chris's reputation was tarnished beyond repair. The fallout was swift and brutal. Chris's business began to crumble as clients pulled out, not wanting to be associated with someone mired in scandal. His social circle disintegrated as word of his affair spread, and people started whispering about his untrustworthy nature. The rumors I had seeded took on a life of their own, growing and morphing into something even bigger than I had anticipated. It didn't take long for Chris to reach out to me. He called me one evening, his voice tense and angry. "What the hell are you doing, Jake?" he demanded. "You think you can just destroy my life like this?" I felt a cold satisfaction as I replied, "You destroyed mine first, Chris. I'm just returning the favor." "You don't understand," he snapped. "This is going to ruin me. I've got a business, a family." "Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to fuck my wife," I cut in, my voice icy. "You made your bed, Chris. Now you get to lie in it." There was a long silence on the other end, and I could practically hear him seething with rage. But I didn't care. I was done playing nice. "This isn't over, Jake," he finally said, his voice low and dangerous. "It is for me," I replied, hanging up the phone. As I sat there, the reality of what I had done began to sink in. I had destroyed a man's life, taken everything he had worked for, and torn it to shreds. Part of me wondered if I had gone too far, if I had let my anger and pain drive me to do something I might one day regret. But then I thought about Linda, about the lies, the betrayal, the way they had both played me for a fool. And I realized that, no, I didn't regret it. Chris had gotten exactly what he deserved. In the days that followed, I watched from a distance as Chris's life continued to unravel. His business was in shambles, his reputation in tatters. I heard through the grapevine that his family was falling apart, that his wife had left him, taking their kids with her. It was everything I had wanted, everything I had set out to do. But as satisfying as it was to see him brought low, it didn't bring me the peace I had hoped for. The pain of Linda's betrayal was still there, festering inside me like a wound that refused to heal. I knew that destroying Chris hadn't fixed anything, it had just been a temporary distraction, a way to channel my anger and hurt into something tangible. As I sat alone in the house that evening, the silence pressing down on me like a weight, I realized that I needed more than revenge. I needed closure. I needed to figure out what my life was going to look like now, in the aftermath of everything that had happened. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: I couldn't keep living in the past, reliving the pain and betrayal over and over again. It was time to move on, to find a way to rebuild my life from the ashes. But for now, I took some small comfort in the knowledge that Chris was suffering, just as I had suffered. He had lost everything, and it was a fate he had brought upon himself. As far as I was concerned, justice had been served. In the days that followed my revenge on Chris, I found myself in a strange limbo. On one hand, I had succeeded in tearing apart the life of the man who had ruined my marriage. His business was in shambles, his reputation destroyed, and from what I'd heard, his wife had left him, taking the kids. It should have felt like a victory, and in some ways, it did. But on the other hand, it didn't change the fact that my own life was still in pieces. The anger had started to fade, replaced by a deep, aching sadness, and a gnawing question: what comes next? I knew what needed to happen. Linda and I couldn't go on like this, living in the same house, pretending we could somehow make things right. The damage was too deep, the trust too thoroughly shattered. As much as it pained me, I knew it was time to face the inevitable: we needed to talk about divorce. It took a few more days before I could gather the strength to initiate that conversation. I found Linda sitting in the living room one evening, staring blankly at the television, though it was clear she wasn't really watching. Her eyes were hollow, the weight of everything that had happened clearly taking its toll. The woman I saw now was a shadow of the person I had once loved. Seeing her like that should have softened me, but instead, it just made me feel even more detached. "Linda," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to talk." She looked up at me, her expression guarded. "About what?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the words I was about to say. "About us. About what happens next." She flinched slightly, as if she knew exactly where this conversation was headed. "Jake, please." "Don't," I interrupted, holding up a hand. "Don't try to talk me out of this. We both know this marriage is over." Her face crumpled, and she looked down at her hands, clasped tightly in her lap. I was hoping we could find a way to fix this," she said softly, her voice tinged with desperation. "I know I've made mistakes, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make it right." I sighed, feeling a pang of sadness for what might have been. "Linda, there's no fixing this. What you did, it's not something I can just forget or move past. We can't go back to the way things were, and honestly, I don't think either of us really wants to." She looked up at me then, her eyes filled with tears. "But what about the kids, Jake? What about Sarah and Lizzie? They need us, both of us." I nodded, my heart aching at the thought of our daughters. "I know. And they'll still have both of us, just not together. We need to do what's best for them, and that means ending this marriage in a way that causes them the least amount of pain." Linda wiped at her tears, her hands shaking. "You're talking about divorce?" "Yes," I said quietly. "We need to talk about how we're going to handle this. We need to make sure the girls are okay, that they know we both love them and that none of this is their fault." She nodded slowly, as if she was finally coming to terms with the reality of the situation. "I don't want to lose them, Jake. I don't want to lose you either, but I know I already have." There was a long silence between us, the air heavy with unspoken regrets. I wanted to say something to comfort her, to make her feel better, but I couldn't. I had nothing left to give her, no more illusions of a future that no longer existed. "Have you thought about where you'll live?" I asked, trying to steer the conversation back to practical matters. "Will you stay here, or do you want to move somewhere else?" Linda hesitated, her brow furrowing as she thought. I think it would be best for the girls if we stayed here, at least for now. This is their home, and I don't want to disrupt their lives any more than we already have." I nodded. It made sense. The girls had enough to deal with as it was. Uprooting them from the only home they'd ever known would only add to their pain. I agree. You should stay here with them. Her eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't expected me to be so accommodating. And you? I'll find a place nearby, I said, keeping my tone neutral. I don't want to be far from the girls, and I want to be there for them as much as possible. But I think it's best if they stay with you most of the time. Linda looked down at her hands again, guilt and sadness etched into her features. You're a good father, Jake. The girls adore you. They'll miss you. I swallowed the lump in my throat, trying to keep my emotions in check. I'll miss them too. But this isn't about what's best for me or you. It's about what's best for them. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I'll do everything I can to make this as easy as possible for them. I promise. I knew she meant it. Despite everything that had happened, despite all the lies and the betrayal, Linda loved our daughters. She might have failed as a wife, but she was still a good mother, and I trusted her to do right by them. What about custody? She asked quietly, looking up at me with a mixture of hope and fear. I want joint custody, I said firmly. But I'm okay with you having primary physical custody. I'll take them on weekends, holidays, whatever works best for them. We can figure out the details later. Linda nodded, relief washing over her face. Thank you, Jake. I was so afraid you'd try to take them away from me. I shook my head. That's not what I want. They need their mother, and they need stability. I'm not going to do anything that would hurt them. There was another long silence, and then Linda spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake. I know I've lost the right to ask you for anything, but I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me someday. Not for us, but for the girls. They need to see that we can still be a family, even if we're not together anymore. I looked at her, seeing the raw vulnerability in her eyes. It was hard to reconcile the woman in front of me with the one who had betrayed me, but I knew she was right. For the sake of our daughters, I needed to find a way to move past the anger, to let go of the bitterness that was eating away at me. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Linda, I admitted, my voice soft. But I can try to be civil, for the girls. They deserve that much. She nodded, tears spilling over once again. I'll take that, Jake. I'll take whatever you can give. We sat there in silence for a while, the weight of our decision settling over us. It was a strange feeling, knowing that this was the end of our marriage, that the life we had built together was over. But in that moment, there was also a sense of closure, a finality that had been missing before. We'll need to talk to the girls, I said finally, breaking the silence. We need to explain what's happening in a way they can understand. Linda wiped her eyes and nodded. Tomorrow, she said. We'll tell them tomorrow. I agreed, knowing it was going to be one of the hardest conversations we'd ever have. But it had to be done. They needed to know the truth, even if it was painful. As I stood up to leave, Linda looked up at me, her eyes filled with sadness. Jake. I know this is the end, but I'm still grateful for the time we had together. Despite everything, I'll always cherish the memories we made. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I just nodded and walked out of the room, leaving her behind. I needed to get out of the house, to clear my head, to think about what my life was going to look like now that this chapter was closing. The night air was cool and refreshing as I stepped outside, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of peace. The anger and pain were still there, but they were muted, distant, as if I had finally taken the first step toward healing. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain, I was going to be okay. The road ahead would be difficult, and there would be days when the pain would feel overwhelming. But I had my daughters, and I had my freedom, and that was enough to keep me moving forward. Tomorrow, I would face the difficult task of telling Sarah and Lizzie about the divorce. I would hold them, comfort them, and do my best to reassure them that, no matter what, they were loved. It wouldn't be easy, but it was the right thing to do. And as for Linda, I knew our paths would continue to cross, especially with the girls involved. We would have to learn how to navigate this new reality, to co-parent and support our daughters while maintaining a respectful distance. It wouldn't be the life I had envisioned, but it was the life I had now, and I was determined to make the best of it. As I walked away from the house, the stars twinkling above me, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I had lost a lot, but I still had so much to live for. It was time to let go of the past and start looking toward the future, one step at a time. The next morning was quiet, almost too quiet. The tension in the house was thick, and it was clear that both Linda and I were dreading the conversation that lay ahead. We had agreed to talk to the girls together, to present a united front, even though we were anything but united at this point. We knew that this was going to be one of the hardest things we'd ever have to do, but it had to be done. I spent the early hours of the morning pacing the living room, trying to figure out the right words, the right way to explain to Sarah and Lizzie that their lives were about to change forever. I couldn't help but feel a knot of guilt tightening in my chest. No matter how much I tried to reassure myself that this was the right decision, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to shatter their world. Linda came downstairs a little after 8. She looked like she hadn't slept at all, her eyes puffy and red. She met my gaze with a nervous, almost pleading look, but I quickly turned away. I couldn't afford to get lost in her emotions right now. We had to stay focused on what was best for the girls. "They're awake," she said quietly, her voice hoarse from crying. "I told them to come downstairs when they're ready." I nodded, my stomach churning with anxiety. I had been dreading this moment since the day I realized our marriage was truly over. The girls had always been the center of my world, and the thought of causing them pain was almost unbearable. But I knew there was no avoiding it. The truth was painful, but it was also necessary. A few minutes later, Sarah and Lizzie came downstairs, still in their pajamas, their faces full of confusion and worry. They could sense that something was wrong, and I hated that we were about to confirm their worst fears. "Come sit with us, girls," I said gently, motioning to the couch. Linda and I sat on either side of them, and I could feel Lizzie's small hand trembling as she reached for mine. Sarah, always the more perceptive of the two, looked between us, her brow furrowed with concern. "What's going on, Dad?" she asked, her voice steady but tinged with fear. "Why do you both look so upset?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to say. "Your mom and we need to talk to you about something important," I began, trying to keep my voice calm and reassuring. "It's not easy for us to say this, and it's going to be hard for you to hear, but we need to be honest with you." Lizzie looked up at me, her big blue eyes wide with worry. "What is it, Daddy? What's wrong?" Linda squeezed Sarah's hand, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Girls, your father and we've decided that it's best if we don't live together anymore." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Sarah's eyes widened in shock, while Lizzie looked from me to her mother, trying to understand what she had just heard. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, her voice cracking. "Are you getting a divorce?" I nodded, my heart breaking as I saw the fear and confusion in their eyes. "Yes, sweetheart," I said softly. "We are. But I want you both to know that this has nothing to do with you. We love you more than anything in the world, and that's never going to change." Lizzie's lower lip began to tremble, and she clung to my arm as if I might disappear at any moment. But why, Daddy? Why can't you stay with us?" I glanced at Linda, who was struggling to hold back her tears. This was the moment I had been dreading most of all, the moment when I had to explain to my daughters that the life they had known was over, that their family would never be the same. "Sometimes, grown-ups, they grow apart," I said carefully, trying to find the right words. "Your mom and we've been having a lot of problems lately, and we've realized that we're not happy together anymore. But that doesn't mean we don't love you. We're still going to be here for you, just in a different way." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and she looked at her mother, searching for answers. "Mom, why can't you just fix it? Why can't you make things better?" Linda choked back a sob, reaching out to stroke Sarah's hair. "I wish I could, honey. I wish I could make everything right. But, sometimes, there are things that just can't be fixed." I watched as my daughters tried to process what we were telling them, their young minds struggling to comprehend the enormity of the situation. I could see the hurt, the confusion, the fear in their eyes, and it tore me apart inside. Lizzie, always the more emotional of the two, started to cry, her small body shaking with sobs. I don't want you to go, Daddy, she whimpered, burying her face in my chest. Please don't leave us. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her close as she cried. I'm not leaving you, sweetheart, I whispered, my own voice breaking. I'll always be here for you, even if I'm not living in the same house. We're still going to see each other all the time, and we'll do lots of fun things together, just like we always have. Sarah wiped at her tears, her expression hardening as she looked at Linda. Is it because of you, Mom? Is this your fault? Linda's face crumpled, and I could see the guilt and shame written all over her features. No, Sarah, she said quickly, her voice filled with desperation. This isn't anyone's fault. It's just the way things have to be. But Sarah wasn't convinced. She turned to me, her eyes pleading. Dad, please don't do this. Please don't leave. We can fix it. We can make it work. I felt a sharp pang in my chest as I looked into my daughter's tearful eyes. I wanted so badly to tell her that everything would be okay, that we could fix it, that we could go back to the way things were before. But I knew that would be a lie. Sarah, I know this is hard, I said gently. And I wish I could make it easier for you. But this is something that your mom and I have to do. We're doing this because we want you and Lizzie to have the best possible life, even if that means things are going to be different. Lizzie lifted her tear-streaked face from my chest, her voice small and broken. Will we still be a family? Yes, Linda said quickly, her voice filled with determination. We'll always be a family. Your father and I will always love you, and we'll always be here for you. That's never going to change. I nodded, trying to reinforce Linda's words. We're still a family, just a different kind of family. We're going to figure this out together, and we'll make sure that you and Lizzie are okay. There was another long silence, and I could see the struggle in my daughters' faces as they tried to come to terms with what we were telling them. It was clear that they were hurting, that they were scared, and it broke my heart to see them like this. But I knew that we had to be strong for them, to guide them through this painful transition. Where will you go, Daddy? Lizzie asked, her voice trembling. Will you be far away? No, sweetie, I reassured her. I'm going to find a place close by, so I can see you both all the time. We'll still spend weekends together, and I'll come to all your school events and everything else. You won't get rid of me that easily. Lizzie managed a small, tearful smile at that, and I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could get through this. It wasn't going to be easy, but as long as we focused on the girls, on making sure they felt loved and supported, we could find a way forward. Sarah, however, still looked troubled. But what about when you leave, Dad? Who's going to be here with us when you're not? Your mom will be here, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. You'll stay with her most of the time, and I'll be just a short drive away. If you ever need me, I'll be there. Sarah bit her lip, her eyes filling with tears once again. I don't want you to go, she whispered. I don't want things to change. I felt a lump in my throat as I reached out to hug her, pulling her close. I know, sweetheart. I know this is hard, and I wish things could be different. But sometimes, change is the only way forward. It might not seem like it now, but we'll all be okay. I promise. The conversation with my daughters was one of the hardest things I had ever had to do. Seeing their pain, knowing that I was the one causing it, was almost unbearable. But as difficult as it was, I also knew that it was the first step toward healing. We had to face the truth, no matter how painful, and move forward together. After we had finished talking, the girls went upstairs to their rooms, leaving Linda and me alone in the living room. The silence between us was heavy, filled with the weight of everything that had been said. Linda looked up at me, her eyes filled with regret. Jake, Don't, I interrupted, my voice firm but not unkind. There's nothing left to say, Linda. We've made our decision, and now we need to follow through. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I know. I wish things could have been different. Me too, I admitted, feeling a deep sense of sadness. But they're not. We have to focus on what's best for the girls now. Linda wiped at her tears, trying to compose herself. I'll take care of them, Jake. I'll do everything I can to make this as easy as possible for them. I know you will, I said quietly. You're a good mother, Linda. Whatever else has happened between us, I know you love them, and I trust you to do right by them. There was a long silence as we both processed the reality of what was happening. The marriage we had once shared, the life we had built together, was ending. It was a painful, messy ending, but it was also a necessary one. Finally, I stood up, feeling the need to get some air, to clear my head. I'm going to take a walk, I said, my voice tired. I need to think. Linda nodded, not saying anything as I headed for the door. As I stepped outside, the cool breeze hit my face, and I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The road ahead was uncertain. There would be difficult days, painful conversations, and moments of doubt. But as I walked down the street, the sun beginning to rise on the horizon, I felt a sense of resolve. I was doing the right thing, not just for myself, but for my daughters. And that was what mattered most. The divorce would be finalized in the coming weeks. Papers would be signed, assets divided, and life would move on. I would find a new place to live, a new routine to settle into. There would be times when the loneliness would be overwhelming, when the memories of what once was would haunt me. But I knew that, in time, the wounds would heal. As I walked, I thought about the future, about what life would look like in this new chapter. It wasn't the future I had envisioned, but it was one I was determined to make the best of. For Sarah and Lizzie, for myself, and even for Linda. In the end, we would all survive this. We would find a way to navigate the new reality, to create a life that, while different from the one we had known, could still be filled with love and happiness. The sun was fully up now, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood. I took one last deep breath and turned back toward the house. There was still a long road ahead, but I was ready to face it. One step at a time. And so, with the rising sun as my witness, I took that first step forward, leaving behind the remnants of a broken marriage and walking toward whatever came next. It was the end of one chapter, but the beginning of another. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope for the future.